they come. Sean? Okay. We have enough chairs? It's been a hell of a week for me. I've just had a swell time. I regret to tell you that Donna Rice can't be here to act as your hostess today. She's probably hostessing somewhere else and doing a fine job, I'm sure. No, actually, I've been very saddened by the events of the past 10 days. I don't think anybody came out of it with very much dignity, not Gary Hart, not Donna Rice, and certainly not the press. When I say the press, I don't mean all the press, of course. I mean that certain shark-like element of the press that goes into a feeding frenzy every time they see something wounded in the water. It's amazing to watch them when they feel that the moral fabric of this great nation has been compromised. They don't hesitate to sink to the occasion. Or below the occasion in this case. But anyway, that's not why we're here. We're here to try to get the focus back on the Iran Contra scandal and the hearings. I'm sure you've all, if you've been anywhere near a television set or a newspaper, you have seen or heard something about this. So I want to thank you all for being here. There are about 700 of you here today. We didn't expect this many people. We've been in a big panic for 3 days. And I think it's a testament to the concern in this community that is often accused of only being concerned about itself. So we're going to get on with it now. Just as a sidelight, the restrooms are directly behind you and down the hill. Okay? First, I'm going to bring up Sara Nelson. Sara is the executive director of the Christic Institute, and she's going to give you some background material, and then she will introduce Daniel Sheehan. And I think you will find that this is a Saturday afternoon well spent. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. I want to start by saying that we really appreciate the fact that all of you have taken the time to come here and be with us today. And we are especially appreciative that Don Henley has given his resources and his time and his home to make it possible for us to be together. And
you gotta take people to where they're at. That's what they're all feeling.
And I want to extend a special thanks as well to Jackson Brown and Daryl Hanna, who have been supporting us for months, and we wouldn't be making it as well as we are without them. And a special thanks again to all of you, because this project, which is growing in leaps and bounds every month, is not a project that can be done by the Christic Institute, and it's not being done right now by the Christic Institute alone. It's being done by people like yourselves, people who are here who have been helping us for several months now in the Los Angeles community, and people in other places of the country who are banding together and saying the time has come for us to expose the activities and dismantle the activities of the secret team and the apparatus of the national security state, so that, thank you, so that our children will not be living in a period of time where our constitutional democracy is eroded and they lose some of the most valuable things that we have a responsibility to preserve for them. So I, again, thank you very much for coming, and I hope that in the course of these discussions, you will think of ways that you want to join with us in an ongoing way and be part of a growing movement that is galvanizing to, in the 200th year of the anniversary of our Constitution, to take action to preserve it. First, I want to describe a little bit about this project. And then I'm going to tell a little bit about the Christic Institute, and then I'll introduce Danny. Usually I say that people around the country are not often aware that there is a lawsuit filed against the team of people that Oliver North has been working with. The visibility for this lawsuit didn't really begin to grow, and its credibility didn't begin to grow until the Hassenfuss event happened, when his plane went down in Nicaragua, and it was discovered that some of the people that he had been in regular communication with were in fact defendants in our lawsuit. The suit was filed in May of 1986, and the investigation began in the spring of 1984. So we have been working on this for a long time. But the press and some of the powers that be in Washington really didn't believe it when we filed this suit a year ago. Then when the Hassenfuss event happened, and then again when the Iranian scandal, an affair emerged with Washington and the diversion of the money to the Contras and the giving of the weapons to the Iranians, again, the players, the key players in those activities were defendants in our lawsuit. And so slowly this credibility and visibility has grown. But yesterday, I mean, as of yesterday, most people in this country probably know this lawsuit exists because Jack Brooks, the representative from Texas, said to Richard Secord, who was a defendant in our lawsuit, in the congressional hearings, what about this lawsuit that was filed against you by the Christic Institute? And he said, it is the biggest fantasy, the biggest fairy tale I've ever heard. I don't take it seriously. The Justice Department doesn't take it seriously. He said, they haven't bothered to serve me, so I don't even think I'm part of this lawsuit anymore, which is a lie. We served him in November. We served his wife at his home in November, and we have documentation that proves that this man has been served. And he said he thought, well, soon this case would be dismissed anyway. In fact, we won the battle over the motions to dismiss in January when the judge ruled in our favor and said, this case is going forward. And we are now in depositions. We are subpoenaing people and putting them under oath and questioning them. And we will be subpoenaing and questioning up to 200 people before this is over. And the judge also said that our pattern of historical racketeering behavior that these people have been involved in is relevant for 25 years. And that means that people can be questioned in this lawsuit for their activities in Vietnam, in Southeast Asia, in Cuba, in Chile, as well as more recently in Iran and Central America. The laws that are applicable in this case, the two primary ones are the violation of the U.S. Neutrality Act because they have been engaged, these 29 people, in an illegal war against Nicaragua, because we have diplomatic relations with Nicaragua and it's illegal for private citizens to engage in a war against a country that we have diplomatic relationships with. Secondly, the RICO Act, the Federal Racketeering Act, which was designed to deal with mob businesses and mob activities, is applicable to these people, because they have been involved in Murder Incorporated and assassination programs, in massive drug smuggling, in terrorism, in arson, and in gun running for 25 years. And the judge acknowledged that the RICO Act applied to them. So again, we're going to be asking them about those kind of activities as well for the last 25 years. The litigation and the investigation are the heart of this because our projects at the Christic Institute are based on the truth. And it's very important to uncover the true facts for the public education and the organizing efforts and all the things that spring from this. But in addition to the investigation and the litigation are these other components, because we feel in this particular situation that we can prosecute these people in the courts, and we can uncover the facts through this judicial system. But ultimately, we can't solve all the problems unless we have the support of the Congress. And we can't get their support unless there's a veritable groundswell around the country of citizens absolutely demanding that they do the right thing. Because the congressional people are afraid. The history of these people and the connections of these people are frightening, quite frankly, to a lot of political leaders who don't really want to take it on. But as American citizens, if we demand that they take it on, if we pressure them and say that our vote for them depends that they take it on, then we have a chance of solving these problems. Now, some of the characters that are defendants in this lawsuit, you will hear Danny talk about, include General Richard Secord, who is now in the congressional hearings. The other day, the first day that he testified, he mentioned several others of our defendants. Theodore Shackley, who is sort of the kingpin of the team of people that we are dealing with here, an ex-CIA agent. Thomas Kleins, his assistant for the last 20-some years. Robert Owen, who is the main link from Oliver North on out to the rest of the secret team. Rafael Chichi Quintera, who's been a political assassin for 25 years and who is now the person who is the link to the Contras in terms of providing them equipment. He's the field, what they call the field man. General John Singlob, who's been the primary fundraiser in this country for the Contras, and a number of other key players who have a long history, who have not known each other for the last 4 years, who have known each other for many more years than that. And most of them used to be in the military or the CIA, and they are now private citizens. Now, the public education and organizing efforts that we are involved in, just to quickly summarize what we are doing. The public education effort is an effort that involves our attempt to really raise the level of consciousness around the country and provide people with the truth of what has really been going on in this aspect of our foreign policy. That is something that some of you may be able to help with. There may be ways that you can help us spread this information. Organizations that you belong to that could join our communications alliance. We are trying to put 100 national organizations together in a communications alliance where we would be feeding them information every month and they then feed it on out to all of their members. At the moment, we're working with 65 organizations, and collectively they have over 20 million members, and we want to expand that to 100 organizations. Our organizing campaign is focusing on the grassroots as well as the national organizations, and we have a growing list of grassroots activists that we are mailing action alerts to on a regular basis, suggesting certain kinds of things that they can do in their communities. The next targeted action is the end of May, what we're calling Penca Week, because the Penca bombing, which Danny will tell you about, occurred on Memorial Day in 1984, and so now there are people all over the country who are doing memorial actions on Memorial Day and during that week to help educate people about what that bombing was all about and what it now means in the context of the current congressional hearings. And again, you may want to be part of that network. You may be a person who is known in other circles, and if you endorsed our case, if you turn the little card over that you have in your packet and say, I endorse this case and you can use my name, that we can list you as an endorser, and that could be very helpful in other people paying more attention to these facts if they see that you do too. So there are lots of ways that you may be able to help us, and I hope that you will decide in the course of this discussion today that you want to be part of this. A few words about the Christic Institute and then Dan Sheehan. The Christic Institute was founded in 1980 by the team of people that did the Karen Silkwood case. Since the Silkwood case, we have gone on to do, which was a victory at the Supreme Court level, we have gone on to do the Greensboro case, which prosecuted the Klan and the Nazis and the Greensboro police for murdering demonstrators in Greensboro, North Carolina, in front of television cameras, and then doing nothing about it in the judicial system until the Christic Institute prosecuted them. That also was a successful case. Thirdly, we've done a lot of work around 3 Mile Island, and most recently we did the first sanctuary defense case in Texas, which was won on Danny's trial arguments on appeal. And now we are involved in this case against the Contra leadership and the team of people that Oliver North has been working with. It is without question the biggest challenge we have ever had, and we are sort of bringing together everything that we've learned in the last 20 years of public interest work, because we've all been involved for a long time, and bringing it to bear on this case. The name Christic comes from Teilhard Chardin, who was a paleontologist and a Jesuit who was very interested. He discovered Peking man, and he was very interested in the evolution of the human family. And he believed and determined that there was a force in the universe, a unifying force, a bonding phenomenon that bonded the universe together and all of its parts in a harmonious way. And that this bonding phenomenon was expressing itself in the human family, in its evolution, by the growing appearance and strength of a sixth sense, a faculty, a spiritual faculty, that was able to discern and understand the unity of things and the harmony of things, and to know the difference between that and disharmony. And he called that force, that bonding phenomena, the Christic force. And so that's how we chose the name Christic. He himself was a Christian, and he specifically, however, stated that what he was talking about was not just something that was a Christian idea. It was something that was of relevance to all of the faith groups and all of the people in the human family, which is one of the reasons he got in trouble. In fact, the Catholic Church repressed all of his writings until after his death. So it was something that embraced everyone, and we chose that name because it expressed a kind of hope that together as a human family we would come to understand our oneness and our harmony with one another before we would destroy ourselves with our capacity in nuclear weapons. Dan Sheehan has been the general counsel, the chief counsel in all of the pieces of major litigation that we have been involved in. And before that, he was a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School. He worked for a number of years at the Cahill-Gordon firm in New York, which is the biggest firm of trial lawyers in the country. He also worked with F. Lee Bailey, where he learned to work with private investigators. And the Christic Institute is known for its ability to do very tough private investigations and uncover evidence at a level that is unusual in the public interest community. He was on the Pentagon Papers case. He was one of 5 lawyers there. He was on the Wounded Knee case when he was litigation director for the ACLU in the Rocky Mountain region. He was at Attica Prison. He has been in 60 different cases, all of which are very important to the public interest. He was the chief counsel in the Silkwood case, coordinating counsel in Greensboro, chief counsel in the Sanctuary Defense case, and he is the chief counsel in this case, and he has been conducting an investigation for 3 years. And now he's going to share with you the most important information that has come out in this investigation. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Thank you very, very much for coming out here and giving us the major portion of your Saturday afternoon. I have just returned from that led us to come into this case. I have to fly out tonight and return to Costa Rica. The international press conference that led us to come into this case. I have to fly out tonight and return to Costa Rica to take the deposition of Eden Pastora on Monday and the commanders of the RDA forces on the southern front of Nicaragua to bring forth the evidence that will make it clear that the people that we have been dealing with here in the secret team will stop at virtually nothing to silence their opposition, that they actually placed a C4 bomb in the midst of an international press conference, destroying many of the international journalist community. Now, as Sara pointed out earlier, you may have heard yesterday morning General Secord responding to questions about our litigation, asserting that this was the biggest fantasy or fairy tale that he had ever seen. So we've come here to this town to explain to them that people can make fairy tales come true. The business that we are in, all of us, is to share insight into the human spirit in a manner that people can hear, that can reach out to average people, to raise up average people so that they can know that they can do things that do not seem to be average. That is what we are about, and we are coming to show them that the Constitution of our country is not a fairy tale, that a belief in the democratic processes in our country is not a fairy tale, and that one doesn't have to be, you know, some kind of straight shooter that goes to church every Sunday and you know, wears three-piece suits, etc., to believe in these things, that this is not square to believe in these values. These are the things that have given us all the ability to be where we've come to today. And so we at the Christic Institute have taken up part of the burden and are going around the country to share that burden with other citizens, with other friends such as you, to help shoulder some of that responsibility to make this dream real. Now, the timing of our coming here is most appropriate, since General Secord is now starting to testify at some length, attempting to rationalize and justify what he has done. The previous Sunday, 1 week ago, on the front page of the New York Times, Louis Tams, the former United States ambassador to Costa Rica, finally confessed that he had been lying publicly, regularly, asserting that they had no support for the Contras in Costa Rica, pointing out in his front page article that he'd been under the directions of a restricted interagency group functioning high in the executive branch of our government, and he was receiving direct instructions to aid the Contras, directly contrary to the direct prohibitions of the United States Congress in the Boland Amendment. And these instructions were coming from not only Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, but also the man who was the commander of the Latin American Central Intelligence Agency, Alan Farn. And, I'm sure this is going to make some of you very happy, Elliot Abrams, the self-righteous Assistant Secretary of State in charge of Latin American affairs, who has been rude and insulting to the American people, but his days are short in that office. What I want to do this afternoon is to share some of the information that we have developed over the period of a 3-year investigation, and I want to discuss with you the legal and constitutional and public policy implications of what the real facts imply is going on here. And thirdly, to warn you and to assist you in warning your family members and neighbors and friends across the country, and all of the many friends that you encounter in the various places you go in your world. Because this is a very special group that's come here today. You encounter many, many thousands of people collectively in 1 year of your life. And we're asking you to share this information and share this warning, to beware of the narrow and limited nature of the investigation that is going down in the Congress now, and the investigation that is going down by the Office of Special Prosecutor. These questions that you've heard for the past few days, propounded by Arthur Lyman, the Chief Counsel for the Senate Select Committee, attempting to suggest that Secord and his associates have been motivated primarily by greed and personal avarice, and somehow the money was sticking to their fingers and that they were pilfering it and taking it for their own wealth. I told Art Lyman the first day that I met him, when he asked us to come and explain to him who these people were, that this was a serious mistake, that these men were motivated by a high level of ideology, that they had been at this operation for many, many years, that they were not involved in this for personal greed or self-advancement. They were into this for power. Power. I guess it's that old Chinatown phrase. You remember when Jack Nicholson asked John Ford in the characters, well, you got all this money, what is it you really want? What is it you really want? And he says, the future. And that's what these people want to control. They want to suppress the people of the world who want a better future. And they want to control that future so that it stays the same as the past. Now, Sara has given you a brief sketch of the Christic Institute, and some of you have heard of the Christic Institute. What I want to do before I bore some of you with just repeating some of the information you may know about this is get some idea from the group how many have actually heard one of the tapes or have listened to or seen some of the videotapes, who have heard some of the factual information about the case that we have here, so I can just understand how deeply to go into some of this. Oh, isn't that wonderful? Well, let me start by saying this about the Institute, that as Sara's pointed out, what we try to do is to fill in the gaps for our institutions in our country. When the Justice Department will not function, when we discover, for example, in the Karen Silkwood case, that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is not protecting our people, that we have to move up and engage in self-help among our people to bring the facts to light, to prove what the facts are, and then move out to share this information. And the people in this community were very, very helpful in mounting the Karen Silkwood film and getting that information out, at least in part, to the American people so that they would know the danger that we were in. from the failures of one of our institutions in our country. The same is true in the Greensboro case, when we all, almost all of us I think, saw those tapes of the Ku Klux Klan and Nazi Party driving up to that demonstration and gunning them down on the main streets of Greensboro, North Carolina, and then not being convicted of so much as littering. And we had to go in the teeth of the Ku Klux Klan to prove to them that these were the facts beneath which the public policy had to be resolved. And that is what we want to do today, to share with you the facts of what happened and started us down this road tonight. Now, this began for us at the Christic Institute some 3 years ago, when we were contacted by the bishop of Brownsville, Texas. And we were asked to go down to defend the first church workers who had been arrested while participating in the sanctuary movement. And they were involved in attempting to bring refugees from El Salvador and Guatemala up out of the Harlingen district of southern Texas, because, as we proved, the Reagan administration, in defiance of the law, the Refugee Act of 1980, was refusing so much as to accept applications for political asylum from the people fleeing from El Salvador and Guatemala, the repression there. Even though the law mandated that they accept applications for political asylum, they were refusing to do so and incarcerating all applicants. That was the public policy problem beneath that case. But in the investigation of that case, down in Brownsville, we were approached by a minister from the Methodist Church, and he was told that by an FBI agent not to have any association with the sanctuary movement, because the sanctuary movement was simply a cover for smuggling known communist terrorists into the United States. That the communist terrorists were going to be organizing military cadres and launching attacks on U.S. military installations and reservoirs and communication centers if the President of the United States found it necessary to launch a direct military strike into Central America, such as in El Salvador or Nicaragua. We then began to realize that the assault against the sanctuary movement workers was part of an overview, part of a plan that the administration had to step by step, incrementally lead us to war against the government of Nicaragua and to suppress the growing liberation theology movement of Central America that is manifesting itself in an effort to throw off the dictatorships that have for so long been friends of the American executive branch. And as we discovered that, we attempted to understand how they could rationalize this assertion that these refugees, these poor and oppressed people, were somehow terrorists. And we began an investigation to find out where the source was of this rumor. And we learned very quickly that the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, on April 6th of 1984, had signed a classified national security decision directive authorizing the going forward with a secret national security mobilization, a readiness exercise here in the United States that would be undertaken to practice for the time when he might find it necessary to declare a state of national emergency in our country, to support a military strike into Central America, the code name of which was to be Operation Night Train. The operation stateside was codenamed Rex 84. And one of the first steps that would be taken would be to round up, within a 2-week period of time, 400,000 undocumented Central American aliens, and to incarcerate them in 10 military detention camps around the United States. And then we learned that Frank Salcido, the deputy director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency that was going to be supervising this, had demanded that Judge William Webster, the director of the FBI, turn over to him and to his boss at FEMA a secret index of some 26,000 names of American citizens who would have to be rounded up as well during the declaration of state of national emergency by President Reagan. William Webster had resisted that and in fact had started trouble inside the administration. And word began to leak out, which we began to get, showing that this readiness exercise was coming down. We then discovered that there was a second portion of this readiness exercise, and that was a program pursuant to which the Defense Department during the declared state of national emergency, was going to be handing out military equipment down to the state National Guard units and eventually down to civilian auxiliary police units that were going to be organized by special statute. They were going to be called state defense forces. But we learned very quickly that the only people that were being told about the organization of these state defense forces were members of private survivalist groups that were engaged in weekend war game training, and members of the Soldier of Fortune organizations, that they were signing up by droves to become members of these state defense forces in Texas, Louisiana, and Alabama. And we learned that in the readiness exercise that was to go down in the spring of '84, they were going to actually practice by distributing military equipment down to these people. But then we learned from a colonel in the National Guard in Louisiana that there was something that he couldn't understand about this program. That this military equipment was going to be distributed down to these state defense forces. But once it was in their hands, each piece of military equipment was going to be revalued from its original manufacturer value to its much higher replacement value. And at the beginning of the exercise, they would distribute, for example, $25 million worth of military equipment, and at the end of the readiness exercise, been revalued to its much higher value, they would gather up $25 million worth of military equipment, which would leave a substantial portion of the military equipment in the hands of these ultra-right-wing private auxiliary groups in those states. And when we began to express our fear of that among people that we knew, people in the FBI, Central Intelligence Agency, and in Customs and other groups, they tended to try to calm our fears by saying, oh, it's not what it looks like. This isn't really 7 days in May. These people are going to be smuggling that equipment to the Contras. This didn't relieve us a great deal. And we pursued the investigation, and we learned that this weaponry in the state of Louisiana was apparently supposed to be brought to a warehouse owned by an ultra-right-wing state legislature by the name of Woody Jenkins, who was the head of a group called Friends of the Americas, who had been bringing down ostensibly humanitarian aid to the Contras. And in Alabama, the group there that was going to be gathering up this military equipment and bringing it to the Contras was a group called the Civilian Military Assistance Group, headed up by Tom Posey, a man of former military experience and an IQ of about room temperature, had decided that since the American people didn't have the courage to take on these communist insurgents in Central America, that they were going to have to do it themselves. And we learned that they were bringing military equipment down to the Fort Lauderdale Hollywood Airport in Miami, and were flying it out secretly to Ilopango Air Base down in El Salvador. Now, Ilopango Air Base is a jointly administered air base by the U.S. military and Salvadorian military. It's not the type of thing that one can secretly sneak in a whole shipment of military equipment into that place. And that military equipment was being transshipped from that place by two men, a man by the name of Felix Rodriguez and a man by the name of Jose Posada Correa. They were in charge of the transshipments down to Costa Rica and into Nicaragua, to the Contras. And in Costa Rica, this equipment was being offloaded at the private ranch of a millionaire American rancher by the name of John Hull. We began to look for a way to bring a piece of federal litigation to enjoin this process from going forward, when at the end of May, in 1984, on Memorial Day, May 30th, we learned of a tragedy in Nicaragua where a press conference had been called by Eden Pastora, the former military hero of the Sandinista movement against Anastasio Somoza. Eden Pastora, Comandante Zero, had become disenchanted with the Nicaraguan Sandinista government and had gone to Costa Rica to mount an indigenous Nicaraguan opposition of a much more moderate political stripe than the FDN Contras in Honduras that were led by the former military commanders of Somoza. He had called the press conference on Memorial Day of 1984 to denounce the FDN and to denounce the American Central Intelligence Agency as ultra-right-wing fanatics who were going to try to attempt to reestablish a military dictatorship in Nicaragua such as that had been led by Anastasio Somoza. However, at the press conference, as he began in his small jungle camp on the river that separates Costa Rica and Nicaragua, you see from the videotapes that we have from the newspaper people and television people that were there, they were taking videotapes of the press conference, and we see at the beginning of the videotape a man in a Yankee baseball cap and t-shirt using the name Per Anker Hansen, posing as a Danish journalist, come to the front of the room and place a large aluminum camera case at the feet of the table from which Eden Pastora was speaking. And as the rest of the international journalist community began to surge to the front of the room to begin the press conference, you can see on the videotape this man skulking to the side of the room and down the side of the small hut and escaping from the rear. And then you see a woman bring a cup of coffee for Eden Pastora, accidentally tip over the camera case and move away. And several moments later, as he began his speech condemning the Central Intelligence Agency and the FDN as fascists who were attempting to reestablish a dictatorship in their country, a huge explosion destroys the press conference and kills 3 international journalists, 5 other people, and seriously maims 24 other members of the international journalist community. The bulletins began to spread from that little jungle camp throughout the world announcing this terrorist attack. And one of the people who had been seriously injured was Tony Avergon, the ABC television cameraman who had been on the scene filming the press conference. One of the people receiving word of this terrorist attack was his wife, Martha Honey, who had stayed home that evening to be with their 2 small children. She heard of the attack. She herself was a journalist for the BBC and for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. She fled to the hospital and awaited the arrival of the dead and the dying to discover that her husband had survived. She flew with him back up here to the United States, and while he was undergoing emergency surgery, she went to the people that are supposed to protect American journalists, the American Newspaper Guild, and she demanded that they organize a fund to finance an investigation to ascertain who had undertaken this terrorist attack on the international journalist community, much as they had organized for Mr. Bowles when he was attacked and killed in Arizona by organized crime. This grant was given, and the investigation began. That had attacked this press conference in an attempt to kill Eden Pastora. They said that it was an ETA terrorist from the Basque country of Spain that had been hired by the Sandinista to do this attack. The investigations of the journalists immediately revealed that the man that they said had carried out the attack, in fact, was in custody in France at that time and had been for months. This disinformation campaign continued, but developments soon occurred after Tony had gotten out of the hospital after several operations and several months of recuperation and joined in the investigation. An extraordinary event occurred. In the beginning of 1985, a young carpenter by the name of Carlos Rojas Chachilla stopped off after work in Costa Rica at the small bar across the street from the American Embassy. Was having a drink when 2 men and another man came into the bar. They left the 3rd man there, and the 2 men went away across the street to the American Embassy. This man who remained began to look frightened and looked around for someone to talk to. He came over to the table of Carlos, and he began to whisper to Carlos that Carlos had to help him get away. He was a member of the terrorist group that had bombed the international press community at Penca. But it was too much for him now. These people were now casing out the American Embassy to blow up the American Embassy and to assassinate the United States ambassador to Costa Rica, to attempt to create an international incident, to compel the American government to launch a strike against Nicaragua, much as they did later against Libya. This man was terrified, and he said that these people were all living at one spot, these terrorists, that they in fact were receiving their military supplies and equipment being flown in, and they were all based on the ranch of a millionaire American rancher by the name of John Hull. This is where the bombing attack came from. These are the people who attacked the journalists. And when Martha Honey discovered this and bore it out and showed that it was true, she began to prepare a report, along with Tony Avergon, to release to the world as to what had happened. But because they, in fact, ended up establishing contact with Carlos and establishing contact indirectly with this man called David. And after several interviews that Carlos conducted of David, the last one of which they were leaving, and they were kidnapped and brought into a truck and brought for miles in the back of a truck up to the ranch of John Hull. They were locked in a small shed. And David said to Carlos, "Carlos, they're going to kill us. They're going to kill us. We have to escape." And the two men, just average men, out of the courage that they needed to survive, threw themselves on their guard and attacked him and knocked him down, broke a chair on him, and broke the window out of this little hut and jumped out of the window and escaped into the jungle in a fusillade of bullets. This is a very major event in their life, and they recall it quite vividly. Carlos, they escaped through the jungle and got back to civilization and were recovered by Tony Avergon. Only a week later, they went to the authorities in Costa Rica, and Colonel Harry Barantes was assigned by the Attorney General to go and inspect these places to find where they'd been kept. And they went to John Hull's ranch and found the place exactly as described, with a window broken out and everything. And 1 week later, they received reports that a person had been infiltrated from the DEAS, the Internal Security, onto John Hull's ranch to pick up information about these people. And they revealed that David had been kidnapped again, brought to the ranch, and over a period of days tortured to death at John Hull's ranch and buried there. And then began the telephone calls coming to Martha and Tony, the threats of death, the threats of blowing them up with their children. It was clear that the telephone number had been given by David. And Carlos was then kidnapped and told that he was going to have to issue a press statement denouncing them. And the people that kidnapped him, these are very intelligent people, they kidnapped him and wanted him to sign a statement saying that he didn't know anything about John Hull. He had never been told anything by David about John Hull. They released him to come to the press conference the next day, and he escaped with the help of Martha and Tony and fled to another country. She then, along with Tony, released the report stating what had happened about the bombing and who was responsible for the bombing. And John Hull sued them for libel, criminal libel, had them charged and prosecuted for criminal libel, for which they could be sentenced to prison in Costa Rica. They then contacted, through a number of journalists, the Christic Institute in Washington, D.C. They had been told by some of the journalists that we had uncovered the trail of weapons leading to John Hull's ranch, that we could help them in their defense. We did. We had the privilege of representing Martha and Tony in the Costa Rican court. And after several days of presenting witnesses that had been developed by Martha and Tony and ourselves, we convinced the federal court in Costa Rica that not only were they innocent of libel, that we had in fact substantiated the charges against John Hull, and all the charges were dismissed and they were set free. At that time, we all resolved that we were going to bring an affirmative suit against these people in the United States, because we had learned that much of the planning for this bombing had taken place in Miami, and some of the materials had been supplied out of Miami for the bombing. So we had jurisdiction in the United States. We began to prepare a criminal assault case to civilly prosecute them for this. And then we learned that, in fact, the bombing materials had been purchased in part with income from a massive cocaine smuggling operation that was running through the ranch of John Hull, that they had devised a mechanism by means of which the planes that were bringing the military supplies from the United States down to the Costa Rican ranch had clearance through the radar. And they would unload the weaponry, and they would load up 600-pound loads of cocaine onto the airplane, the same airplane, and fly it back into the United States, distribute the cocaine, and purchase more military equipment. This was because, of course, the United States Congress had cut off all funding and had prohibited the White House and any of its agencies in the executive branch from assisting the Contras. And so they began their program to finance their operations. Having discovered that, we realized that these people were engaged not only in narcotics trafficking, in laundering the narcotics income through the banks in Miami, not only in murder and in arson and blowing people up, but all of the series of acts that are necessary to prosecute them as a federal racketeering enterprise. It's quite a curious selection of words that Secord has constantly used to refer to their group, the enterprise. The enterprise is what we have sued now in the case of Tony Abergon. We filed the lawsuit against them not only for assault, but also for racketeering. We filed this lawsuit against them the day before May 30th of 1986, just about 1 year ago. And in that lawsuit, we began to name the people, because we learned that under the racketeering statute, we could not only prosecute the people that did the bombing, but we had the authority to prosecute all of the people in the enterprise who supplied the materials and were engaged in this criminal enterprise to mount a war in violation of the Federal Neutrality Act, a criminal statute. And as we began to prosecute our case, we were approached by a former military intelligence officer. And he said, "Don't you realize who these people are that you have here? Don't you realize the opportunity that you have if you take this slowly and carefully and step by step, uncover who these people are and what they've been doing?" And he began to put us in touch with people from the FBI, from Customs, from DEA, from military intelligence, from the veterans of the Vietnam War. He put us in touch with many, many people, and we began to develop a picture which we want to share with you. We learned that these people, Theodore Shackley, Tom Kleins, Richard Secord, Albert Hakim, Eric von Marbod, Rafael Chichi Quintero, and the others, have been engaged together in this type of activity for some 25 years. That these were the people, most of them, who had supervised the private Contra war, the secret Contra war against Cuba, starting back in 1959, under your friend and mine, Richard M. Nixon. That Richard Nixon in 1959, when Batista had been driven from Cuba, along with his criminal partners, the people in Meyer Lansky's criminal organization, run by Santo Trafficante, had been pushed out of Cuba. The Vice President of the United States, Richard Nixon, operating out of the National Security Council, sitting as the chair of a special task force called the 5414 Committee, on which also Alan Dulles sat, the head of the CIA. They began a secret recruiting program among the supporters of the ultra-right-wing supporters of Batista and the criminal elements that were their business partners in the prostitution and gambling and narcotics trafficking out of Cuba. And they began to organize a secret war group, a low-intensity war group, codenamed Operation 40. This group began to infiltrate into Cuba to try to destroy the socialist government in Cuba, not because they were agents of the Soviet regime, not because they had missiles there, not because they were in fact engaging in any of the forms of totalitarianism of which they were being accused, but because they wanted to have another way, not subject to the control of the United States. And this Operation 40 began to go down against them all the way from 1959 into 1960. But then a very interesting thing happens which becomes extremely important for our purposes. In January of 1960, Santo Trafficante, who had fled to Tampa, who was the head of the mafia in Tampa, decided he wanted to reach out to participate in Operation 40 to help destabilize the government of Cuba. And what he did is he reached out through his associates in organized crime, a man by the name of Johnny Roselli and a man by the name of Sam Giancana, who was the Don of the mob in Chicago. They reached out to a very interesting man by the name of Robert Mayhew. Robert Mayhew was the #1 man in charge of the Howard Hughes empire in Las Vegas. Because Richard Nixon had a special relationship with Howard Hughes and Robert Mayhew, they were secretly funding ultra-covert programs, unauthorized by Congress, unauthorized by the American people, unknown to the American people, being financed by Howard Hughes. And Santo Trafficante knew that. So he reached out through Robert Mayhew, and they set up a meeting. The representatives of Richard M. Nixon and Santo Trafficante, they met at the Fontainebleau Hotel in January of 1960 in Miami. In the meeting were Robert Mayhew and John Roselli and Sam Giancana. And they devised there a secret assassination team made up of 10 men, which eventually grew to 15. It was known as the S-Force. Super secret, to be recruited out of Operation 40 operatives. Now, the people on that secret assassination team that was established back in January of 1960 become extremely pertinent for their members of the secret team that has been functioning for many years throughout the world in our name. Let's review some of the people on the secret team, the assassination team, organized in January of 1960 by Richard Nixon and Sandro Trafficante. First, Felix Rodriguez, who was named by Hassenfuss as the commander of the Ilopango airlift for the Contras into Nicaragua. Also on the assassination team was Jose Posada Correa, known to you perhaps as Ramon Medina, who was the number 2 man in charge of the Ilopango airlift. A third man, whose name is Rafael Chichi Quintero. He is the man who supervised the construction of the Costa Rican airstrips where they landed the equipment for the Contras. He's also the man that delivered the $2 million in the attempt to ransom Mr. Buckley, the Beirut station chief, who had been kidnapped through the Iranians. There are 3 other men that were on that assassination team. A man by the name of Rolando Martinez, a man by the name of Diaz, and a man by the name of Frank Sturgis. These people may sound familiar to you not as members of the assassination team put together in 1960 by Richard Nixon, but as the men who were caught in the Watergate Hotel in 1971, wiretapping the telephones of Larry O'Brien, who you remember, Larry O'Brien, is the chief of the Democratic National Committee. But immediately prior to that time, he had been the number 2 man under Robert Mayhew in the Howard Hughes empire. None of this information surfaced at the time in Watergate, that these people were who they were. But the other people all become relevant to the secret team, because that secret team, which included also Rafael Villaverde and Raul Villaverde and Ricardo Chavez, these people were supervised by another man in the secret training camp down in Oaxaca, Mexico, a man by the name of E. Howard Hunt, that supervised that assassination team. And these people functioned all the way until the election of November of 1960, where Richard Nixon planned to become President of the United States to run that secret assassination team covertly for his own benefit. As we know, they were defeated, and John Kennedy became president in November of 1960. And when they came in in January of 1961, they were told about Operation 40, the covert operation, the low-intensity warfare operation, but not the assassination team. But these people functioned even throughout 1960 all the way to 1965. But in 1961, as you recall, Robert Kennedy took the Operation 40 group, the low-intensity warfare group, and mobilized them into a full-scale invasion of Cuba, which was a disaster at the Bay of Pigs, and it failed. But by mid-1961, they'd reestablished the Operation 40 group, renamed it Operation Mongoose, and ran the low-intensity covert war against Cuba from 1961 all the way to 1965. In 1961, brought in to run that operation was a 34-year-old CIA agent by the name of Theodore Shackley. His assistant in charge of training was a man by the name of Tom Kleins. They ran the operation off a secret base that was codenamed JM Wave on the southern campus of the University of Miami. They ran this operation against Cuba all the way to 1965, when that group was shut down because they were caught smuggling narcotics. But the leadership of that group, Theodore Shackley, Tom Kleins, Rafael Chichi Quintero, and the others, they were transferred to Laos in Southeast Asia. And in Laos and Southeast Asia, Theodore Shackley became the deputy chief of station under Gordon Jurgensen. He brought with him Tom Kleins, and they immediately established contact with a man by the name of Vang Pao. Vang Pao was a prince of the Mao tribe, of the Hmong, and the CIA wanted to have these people to be unconventional warfare assets. Indeed, in order to obtain their support, what they did is they recognized that Vang Pao was one of the 3 main traffickers in opium and heroin in Laos. So what they did is Theodore Shackley mounted an operation to suppress the opium trade in Laos of all of the competitors of Vang Pao. And they set up an operation to interfere with the trafficking of everyone except Vang Pao in the opium. And they set up an air operation to drop explosives on the competitors of Vang Pao, and indeed to fly Vang Pao's troops around, including flying around opium for Vang Pao. The person that was brought in to run that air operation under Theodore Shackley and Tom Clines was a man by the name of Richard V. Secord. You didn't hear him being questioned about that. And you will not hear him being questioned about that until he sits in that chair in depositions in our case. You see, the people do not want to talk about this history. They don't want to talk about the fact that that group, using the income from the monopoly control over the opium that was established in the hands of Vang Pao, were used to finance the training of the Hmong in an ultra-secret program to train them as political assassins in Southeast Asia. That these people were trained by Rafael Chichi Quintero and Ricardo Chavez and Felix Rodriguez. And they moved out inside Southeast Asia and assassinated between 1965 and 1975 over 100,000 non-combatant civilian women and men in that country who were school teachers, bookkeepers, mayors of small towns. Not combatants, but people that were attempting to establish a viable infrastructure in that country, but who would not oppose the Pathet Lao in that country. You will not hear about that history until these people sit in that chair in depositions in our case, because they do not want to talk about that in the United States Congress. They do not want to talk about the fact that in 1968, Theodore Shackley became chief of station in Laos, and immediately thereafter, Santo Traficante flew from Tampa, Florida, to Southeast Asia and met at a hotel in Saigon with Vang Pao and became the #1 importer of China white heroin in the history of our country. And the heroin began to flow. To you about the fact that Theodore Shackley became the chief of station in Vietnam and Tom Clines became his deputy. And they ran that program until 1971, when they were both taken back into the United States and made head of the Western Hemispheric Operations for CIA and ran Track 2 against Salvador Allende in Chile, personally supervising Tom Clines and Rafael Chichi Quintero in the kidnapping of General Snyder, the chief of staff of Salvador Allende, and brought about the execution of Salvador Allende and the downfall of that democratically elected government in September of 1973, at which point they were rewarded by being elevated, Theodore Shackley and Tom Clines together, with Theodore Shackley being made the director of Far East Operations for Southeast Asia, at which point they continued to smuggle the money from Vang Pao. Knowing that that war was coming to a close, they began to smuggle the money from Vang Pao's heroin into a secret bank account down in Australia at the Nugan Hand Bank to establish ultra-covert funding for programs of their choice. And what were those programs of their choice at the close of the Vietnam War? In 1976, Richard Secord was transferred to Iran. He went to Iran and became the director of foreign military sales in Iran. And he began to embezzle millions of dollars from that program. And how did he do it? When he was asked to sell a military weapon to a country in the Middle East, he would say, I can't engage in a direct government-to-government sale to you. You have to go see my broker. My broker is Albert Hakim. And Albert Hakim would sell the weapons to them not at the manufacturer cost for which they were available from the Pentagon, but for their much higher replacement value. And they would sell the weapons, the F-14, the major transport planes, they would sell them to them for the replacement value, take that money, take the cost of manufacture, the much lower value, and give it to the United States Pentagon, and take the extra money. You heard all last week, where'd the extra money go? They've been doing this for years. The extra money went to the Nugan Hand Bank in Australia for ultra-covert operations chosen by Theodore Shackley and Tom Kleins and Richard Secord and Albert Hakim and Eric von Marbod. These were the people that began to organize the secret team because they didn't know what was going to happen in the elections of 1976. They wanted to store up a secret fund so they would have it at their disposal. And in 1976, Theodore Shackley was elevated to become the director of all covert operations throughout the entire world for the Central Intelligence Agency under George Bush, who became the director of the Central Intelligence Agency in 1976. So who is Theodore Shackley? Theodore Shackley is the director of covert operations for George Bush. And that is exactly who he is. And they set up that operation in 1976, but another funny thing happened to them on the way to the election in November of 1976. They weren't elected again. And elected was President Carter. He appointed to be the head of the Central Intelligence Agency Stansfield Turner. They forced out of office some 820 of the CIA's covert operational directorate because of these types of operations. But what happened was in 1978, these people, knowing that they had to do something to continue this program, they continued this program without the knowledge of the President of the United States, without the knowledge of the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. They ran a covert political assassinations program. Theodore Shackley and Tom Kleins contacted Ed Wilson and had Ed Wilson come from England to set up a program in Iran where he would hunt down and eliminate people that they viewed to be opponents of the Shah of Iran. They tagged them as terrorists. And they looked to find where some of these people might be receiving their training. And they found that they were being trained in Libya. And so Ed Wilson contacted Muammar Gaddafi. Understand, Ed Wilson working for Theodore Shackley and Tom Kleins. Theodore Shackley being the Assistant Deputy Director for Operations of the Central Intelligence Agency in charge of covert ops. And Ed Wilson offered to sell to Muammar Gaddafi 12-day delay time fuses for bombs, which they obtained from a man in the Central Intelligence Agency by the name of Bill Weisenberger. They obtained these things with permission and knowledge of Theodore Shackley and gave them to Muammar Gaddafi. That did not obtain the information they wanted. They were after the information. Where are the bases where these people are being trained? What is the identity of these people that are being trained to come into Iran, who are hunting down some of the torturers in Savak, who are hunting down some of the major military leaders of the Shah? He didn't get the information from that, so he moved to selling them C4 explosives. He sold them C4 explosives, and that got him closer, but it didn't get him the information. He then began to offer them the services of the secret team. He offered to them Rafael Chichi Quintero, Rafael Villaverde, and Raul Villaverde, not only to train their people in assassinations, but also to, in fact, carry out direct assassinations for Muammar Gaddafi. This got them the information. And they discovered the names. They could get the identity of the 5-person teams that were being flown from Libya into Iran. They would get the false nationality in their false passports and the flight number that they were on. But they learned at that time that not only were they training people to go into Iran, but they were training people who they viewed to be freedom fighters to go into Nicaragua and to go into El Salvador and to go into the Philippines to oppose those regimes. That information is the beginning of the scandal that we stay here today to hear about. Because we have learned that when they learned about the people being trained to go to El Salvador and Nicaragua and the Philippines, that information was passed on to Theodore Shackley and Tom Kleins. And they gave the instruction to Ed Wilson that he was to convey the false nationality of the passports and the flight numbers of those teams to Rafael Chichi Quintero. Rafael Chichi Quintero, who was based, hidden out in the Mexican National Oil Company at Pemex, along with Ricardo Chavez. They would lead the task forces, the teams, to interdict those 5-man groups and would assassinate them. They were based at the Pemex Oil Company, which at the time was under the direction of a man by the name of Jorge Diaz Serrano, the former business partner of George Bush in a company by the name of Zapata Oil Company. This interdiction, however, could not go down until Theodore Shackley and Tom Clines talked with a man by the name of James Buckley. James Buckley, who at the time was the head of the anti-terrorist program for the Central Intelligence Agency. The man who was kidnapped in Beirut in March of 1984 became one of the hostages being held. And you didn't see the type of activity on the part of the White House to try to get hostages out prior to that time. The families were coming and pleading with them, wringing their hands, and getting no help from the White House. However, in March of 1984, when James Buckley was kidnapped, a messenger was sent from the Iranian government. Because as it turns out, Buckley was kidnapped in Beirut, but he was brought by freighter and plane to Tehran, Iran. He was tortured in Tehran by the very people with whom we were negotiating, because they sent out an emissary, a man by the name of Gubanafar, to begin the negotiations on behalf of Buckley. Now, who did they go to? Did they go to our Secretary of State to begin those negotiations? No. Did they go to the White House to begin those negotiations? No. Did they go to the Defense Department? No. Did they go to the Central Intelligence Agency? No. Gubanafar went to Theodore Shackley. Theodore Shackley, who had been ordered out of the government in January of 1978 because they discovered that he was business partners with Ed Wilson, that they had organized a company called the Egyptian American Transport and Service Company, that they were private partners in that, which is a key to this entire scandal. Ask them to tell you about EATSCO, the Egyptian American Transport and Service Company, the partners in which were Theodore Shackley, Tom Clines, Richard Secord, Eric von Marbod, and Ed Wilson. This is the company that was given the exclusive contract to transport all of the equipment to the Egyptians under the Camp David Accords. These are the people who, in fact, when it was discovered that they were business partners with Ed Wilson, Theodore Shackley and Tom Clines were not indicted, like Ed Wilson was, for selling the equipment to Muammar Gaddafi. Theodore Shackley and Tom Clines were allowed to resign and collect their retirement benefits from the CIA. And who was the man who was the deputy director of the Central Intelligence Agency at that time in 1978, who authorized them to resign rather than to be indicted? Mr. Carlucci. Carlucci, who has now been brought in by the president to be his new national security advisor to clean this mess up. And when it was discovered in 1982 that Richard Secord had been a partner of EATSCO, of Ed Wilson, when he was the director of the Foreign Military Sales Program in the Middle East, and he was ordered to stand down from his command and to take lie detector tests, who was it over in the Defense Department that ordered him reinstated without taking the lie detector tests so he could resign? Mr. Carlucci, once again, who had moved from the Central Intelligence Agency to the Defense Department and then allowed Secord to resign. These are the people who have been together for many, many years. And what did EATSCO do when the United States government, under President Carter, under the Harkin Amendment, cut off all military supplies to Anastasio Somoza, the dictator of Nicaragua, in October of 1977? When it was determined that he was engaged in the systematic violation of the human rights of his own citizens, and it was prohibited by law to give any military equipment to him, the Egyptian American Transport and Service Company under Theodore Shackley and Tom Clines began to sell weapons to Anastasio Somoza. These are the men of the secret team that supplied the military equipment in defiance of American policy to the dictatorship of Nicaragua. And when Anastasio Somoza fell in July of 1979, these are the secret team members who began to supply the military equipment to the Contras at their very inception, that gave them the weapons, gave them the financial support, gave them the political support that they needed to organize and mount that group to attack the Nicaraguan government. And so when the Reagan administration came to power in January of 1981 and decided that they were going to take over the funding and training of the Contras, they took over the Contras from the secret team. So when they were caught at the end of 1983 mining the harbors in Nicaragua and passing out the assassination manuals, advocating the assassination of whom? Private civilians in Nicaragua, school teachers, bookkeepers, and other people, mayors of the towns. When all the money was cut off by the Boland Amendment, which was passed in March of 1984, the White House merely went back to the secret team, to Theodore Shackley, Tom Clines, Richard Secord, and these men, and asked them to reinstitute the same types of supply routes that they had before. And their supply officer had been Rafael Chichi Quintero, who turned the affair over to Vincent M. Canestraro from the Central Intelligence Agency, and then turned it back to Chichi Quintero. These are the people. These are the people of the secret team that have been functioning for many, many years in our country and outside of our country in our name. And these are the people who, when in the final analysis we try to determine what has happened here, we realize that the questions to be asked are not the questions of, did the president know about the transfer of a part of the profits from one of the sales of weapons to Iran to the Contras? The question is going to be, what was that negotiation all about? For what did we give 40 tractor-trailer loads of tow missiles to the Iranians? Why did we sell them the Hawk missiles? It will be learned that in fact that was given for hush money, for the silence of the Iranian torturers of James Buckley, because James Buckley, while under torture, told the Iranians about the secret team, told the Iranians about the assassinations program, told the Iranians about the secret source of funding from the heroin trafficking of Southeast Asia and the secret bank accounts and the cocaine trafficking. This is the scandal. This is the activity of these midnight soldiers of the national security state that have been defying our Constitution, have been defiling our democratic process for 25 years now. And we stand on the threshold today of an extraordinary opportunity here. We stand on the threshold of an opportunity to move out from these hearings, to let them move and deal with these little minor sales, but to get to the bottom of what this scandal is all about, to show that these people have been in operation for all this time, to show that in fact there has been a shadow government for our country's foreign policy for all of these years. And we can understand what has gone wrong in our country. What has happened? Why is it that people are not so proud to be Americans anymore? Why is it that we have endless enemies throughout the world? It's not because of you and me. It's not because of our friends. It is because of the secret team. And it's not because of the Reagan administration. It's not because of Ronald Reagan, though he will be impeached because of his association with them, as will George Bush. The secret that has to be exposed is the secret team itself, and what their activities are, what their source of funding has been for so long. And people say to us, oh, don't talk about this. Allow the congressional hearings to go on, trying to convince the American people that these people are just personally greedy, to convince the people that it may just be this one administration. Let them try to convince the American people that this is nothing more serious than a small cancerous nodule on the nose of one single president. Whereas, in fact, as I've said before, this is a cancer deep in the chest of our American body politic. And these are the men who will tell you that you have to be afraid, that you cannot dare to look into the operation to remove this cancer, because the body politic is not strong enough to withstand the operation. They will tell you that you must follow them and listen to them and allow them to minimize the dangers so they won't embarrass our body politic. These are the men who have never trusted in the help of the body politic of our country. They have never trusted in the democratic processes and the constitutional systems that we have. They are the ones who had to go to the back alleys and to the drug smugglers, to the Santo Traficantes, to the Vang Paos, to carry out the Phoenix program and these assassination programs. because they didn't trust us. They didn't trust our government. They didn't trust our system. The fact of the matter is, those of us who are gathered here today and will be gathering across the country in the next year are the ones who have the confidence in our system, who have the confidence to undertake the operation. For like any cancer, it cannot be ignored. The fear is real, as is always when one discovers the cancer. But the courage is as real in our people to go in and root out this cancer. And we come to people across the country now. We talk to the World Affairs Council. We've talked to people. This is family here. We are people here who have access to the communications and to the media of our country. We are the people who know that we are not unpatriotic, that we are not attacking our government, we are not attacking our system of government. This is not an issue which divides the left and the moderates of our country. This is not an issue that separates Republicans from Democrats. This is an issue that is as important to us as Americans as anything we have ever done. This is the job for all of us. And therefore, we ask at the Christic Institute for your help in spreading the information. We will convey to you the information as it is developed, the sworn testimony, the documented proof. And we ask you to share with your
Are we going to do some questions?
Oh, what am I doing?
Actually, we thought we would just let them question you.
Sometimes at some of these events, we open the event to questions, but we thought we wouldn't do that this time. And Dan and Sarah will be here for a while, and you can ask them anything you want. I want to remind you that this is a fundraising event, and both Don and I felt that it would be better to have you hear this information before asking for a contribution. I'd like to give you a couple of figures here. There are about 30 employees at the Christic Institute, all of whom make $15,000 a year each. That means that Dan Sheehan makes $15,000 a year, and it means the woman answering the phone makes $15,000 a year. And I think last year I was about to tell you it was $9,000 a year because that's what it was up until this February. I think they changed it. Their budget last year was $500,000, and it has grown to $2 million a year now because of the response to their investigation, which, although it was going on up until last November, there was not a great deal of response. And when these events started becoming known, their phones started ringing off the hook, and they began to lay on more people to answer the phones, as well as more investigators and more people to take depositions. We urge you to endorse this project, to become as familiar with the material as you can, to fill out the cards that you've been given, as well as make out a check. We'd like you to fill out the cards so that you can continue to hear as these events continue to break. You may know more people that want to know about it, people that you can think of that you wish were here to find out about this. And you may think of other ways to aid this investigation. This investigation costs about $40,000 a week. They have 5 investigators, full-time investigators in the field, and they have to take about 200 depositions. And they also have to buy a computer system now to handle the information as it's coming in. So we urge you to be as generous as possible and to put your energy and your beliefs behind this historic investigation. And now we'd like to invite you to spend the rest of the afternoon talking and eating. There's some food that will be served now, and feel free to ask Danny and Sarah any questions you might have. And thank you for being here.
Excuse me, just one moment, please. First of all, I want to thank you for whatever you may decide to do to help us. I just want to mention that your contributions are tax deductible. We are a nonprofit organization, so you can deduct them from your taxes. I also want to introduce Candy Van Runkel, who is the director of our office.
What do you think about what you heard?
I think it's shocking. I think it's horrifying, but like at the end when he said that once you identify the cancer, in a body, then you have the opportunity to heal the sickness. That's very exciting. That's very thrilling. I think today was a multitude of emotions, you know, like a roller coaster, down and then up at the end, because you really have a sense of there being the opportunity for light at the end of the tunnel, because now once you can identify your enemy, and I don't mean just the individuals, but the perimeters of where it is, then you have every opportunity to rid the body of the problem. I think it's very exciting, and I sure hope everybody gets behind it, and where it's time, it is time.
Thank you.
Pass out in the middle of this.
No problem. Another one. Every time you came up with
A lot of information.
that's 25 cents. You go 50 cents. It's never failed to do that.
I think it's the foremost issue involved that we could be involved in America or in the world. I mean, it's the most unbelievable lineup of evidence and the most sincere evidence of commitment. You know, I think it's definitely the thing that I'm going to be focusing on in terms of being able to deal with this whole crisis that's going on in Central America and in the whole world. And I'm real glad to see the entertainment community coming out. I think this is just the beginning of letting people know we have to have a shadow investigation of our own. If there's a shadow government going on, I think this is Danny's work is something I've been involved with since the Silkwood case and the No Nukes movement, and he's as close to a saint as I could think. So I'm very glad to be here. Thank you.
Looks good. Look forward, just actually, that's good, right?
I've been up all night shooting a motion picture. I'm very tired, so I'll probably look.
Well, you've heard a lot of information today. What do you think about what you heard?
Well, I think that the real strength of a great litigator is clarity. And I think that Danny Sheehan is remarkably clear and precise in his building of a case against this particular insidious phenomenon that's occurring in America and has basically occurred in the Western world for a long time. My fear always is that it's simpler for the common man to romanticize the perverse thief aspect of these individuals than it is for them to understand the difference between the real insidious nature of perverse ideology. And so I thought that his opening remark that we mustn't look at these men as greedy people and reduce the way in which they're perceived as just money grubbers, because that's just too simple a model, it's too simple a paradigm. And I think it's very important in the way in which this is presented to the American people that the kind of robber baron, cowboy, kind of paradoxical love-hate relationship that the American history has with this type of behavior be clearly disassociated from it. And I think that's the real problem in the re-education process, and hopefully that'll be an area which is focused in some way. That's my own reaction to it, and I hope to be within my way to make contributions. And I personally have always believed that that the Kennedy assassination is in some way associated with at least the, if not this group, groups that are similarly constructed. It's just all too coincidental to have occurred within the same context. And I believe that fundamentally, and maybe this is my own crazy point of view, that when America answers the Kennedy assassination, America will be giving the single most powerful proof to the American people as to what was going on. I think that that myth is a very strong one, and I think that if evidence can be addressed also in that regard, that it should be uncovered, but not at the not to suffer this evidence. That's why I'm glad people wouldn't bring that up. I mean, I think that one should focus specifically on this case, and I think the brilliant thing of this Mr. Sheehan is that he tends to take a really proper lawyer approach. I think Jefferson and Madison and either the Federalist and the non-Federalist would have been proud of his legal precision. Thank you.
Is that right?
Hi.
Hello, Marianne. How are you? No.
My brother was actually his pre-war.
You heard a lot of information today from Daniel. What do you think about what you heard?
I thought it was pretty scary, and I think it's important that people should hear it. I was very shook up. It sounds like a movie, and it's not particularly a situation that you want to believe can actually go on in life. Certainly not with women and children in the world, or men for that matter.
What do you think about the direction the Christic Institute is taking in presentations like this?
Well, I think it's very important that we hear all the sides, and I hope that it influences people to find out more about what's going on, not only with their governments, but with their lives.
Oh, really?
Hi, I'm Julie. Thank you, bye.
Matter of fact,
My colleague Garrison. That's right. Sprague was fired, and Robert Blakey was made the new head. He closed down the investigation and issued a report saying that there was circumstantial evidence to believe that more than just what's he said was involved in Oswald, and that the prime suspects in the conspiracy seem to be certain elements of organized crime in Cuba. What he didn't say is that the elements of organized crime were Santo Traficante, who'd been working with the shooter team, and that the Cubans were the shooter team. They were the suspects. They never pursued it.
how long ago did you put this back together? This is making all these different.
We got to go.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you for 1 second.
Just talking.
Right. Well, a lot of the stuff that you said.
I think it's a terrible mistake.
I'm going to be back in. Why? Yes, we're going to be.
Because I think we're going to be stuck. I'd rather just throw him to the coals. And he's about to sign a. I'm not going to talk with you guys.
I had a study that I grabbed thinking about having to do with rape, and I guess that there's really not as many rape cases.
But it's different.
This is one that says you can get to. Yeah. So I thought that was. This morning it was on cable.
Did you hear about the Beverly Hills High School thing?
Christic at Beverly Hills.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. He wasn't there. I went to one at Person's House in Beverly Hills. I didn't hear it before
That narrows it down. There we go.
I know.
Be getting it even.
It's amazing what I learned.
She's doing like a report on it. School.
You are? Yeah, I'm really excited. I mean, it's like, oh my.
And I'm thinking, what a punk, I never even, I've gotten, that and one or two other emails from people. I never had the time to sit down and write a response to it. But I thought about that when I was reading about her trip to the Soviet Union. I'd really like to.
She'll be here next month.
Oh, yeah?
She'll be here for about 3 weeks.
Heard a lot of information this afternoon, Allie. What do you think about what you heard?
I was really amazed because I'd heard of the Christic Institute before, but I didn't know about the work that they were doing, and I didn't know anything about the far-reaching depths of the scandal, just what I'm getting across the news, which I can now understand is only the top or the tip of the iceberg, that there's so much more. And what really amazes me, too, is that it's been going on for so long with these people, and it's been 25 years with this group. What did you call them again? The the secret team. The secret team. I mean, I was sitting with some friends and we were saying, this is like a spy novel, but it's for real, it's very frightening. So my eyes have really been opened today, I have to say.
That's great.
Thanks. Thank you.
What's your schedule like today? Can you stay how we tear into the sound system? I need a couple of
Film crew. I wondered if it was a joke when I saw his thing earlier. Akamani.
We have it all together before. You know, big.
So you did do a video of this? But
But you know a lot about Daniel's work, and I know you interviewed him yesterday on the radio.
Yes.
What do you think about the information that's presented here today?
Well, I think it's extremely important to put together who the secret team is. It's basically a military junta that has had executive power in the United States, and I think it has to be identified. And behind all of this, we have to see the moral and ethical cravings of the people of the United States, that all of the goodness that they grew up with, that it comes out, and that we can say in many ways, quote, we're better than that. We're better than what has been done in our name. And that the real crime in all of this has been our policy and the way that policy's been conducted. And I think that it is an affront to the greatness of the American people. And so these people have to be identified and isolated.
What do you think about the focus of the Christic Institute?
I think it's very exciting because it does look at the moral issues. And I think that the focus is a non-sect focus, and a focus that really brings the best out in all of us, in the things that we want the United States to be and how we want it to relate to the other nations of the world. We're only 6% of the world's people, and we really can't go on kind of running the world quietly as 6%. We have to make amends and renew our friendship with the other 94% of the people who live on this globe and who are really getting very irritated with our policies.
Thanks.
Surely, peace. You're welcome. I appreciate the time. Thanks so much. International stories for
No, she wasn't on hockey.
About to go.
Played for the U.S. Olympic team.
You look so healthy. What have you been doing?
Read the laws.
I can't say.
This is that he sued the Lou Grant Show and got a settlement.
Is that right?
Yes. And he deserved it. They ripped off the Silkwood Story. We did a version of the Silkwood Story, and Danny told me they settled for a decent amount of money, and I was glad to hear it.
That's great.
This is as substantial an American as there is today, Danny Sheehan, and if there were more teachers like him on the way up, we'd all be happier, brighter, and the country would be in better shape. No question about it. So the more informed we can get, the more aware we can get, and the world will be a little peaceful and less violent.
What do you think about the information that you heard this afternoon here?
Well, I'd heard the information before. I passed it on to a congressman in Utah who looked at me like I had just landed from another planet. I've subsequently gotten 2 letters from him asking for whatever more information I can come up with. Please give it to him. Everything that Danny Sheehan predicted in the first week of January has come true ahead of schedule. People who are correct prematurely pay a heavy price for it. But when you're correct and informed 1 or 2 months ahead of the rest of your friends and neighbors, you're considered a visionary. So the timing is everything. And I think the timing is right. I think people are ready for the truth. And even though it hurts, people are finding out the truth from the strangest places. The truth is coming out about PTL and all the people who are taking advantage of people who genuinely have faith. Well, if we have faith in this country, we have to know the truth. And thanks to Danny, more and more people are finding out, and we will pass the information along to other people. So we all know what's happening when it's happening, and we can't say that our parents lied to us when we were children. We're the parents now, we're the grown-ups, and it's our responsibility to know.
Thank you. Thanks.
Closer, Jake.
Okay. Well, you guys heard a lot of information this afternoon from Danny Sheehan. What did you think about what you heard?
I'm amazed. It's really intense. I I think that it's important that someone like this is presented to the people because you know, it's scary and it shows people. It's it's telling the truth to the American people. You know.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much information that nobody had any clue about, and that's been going on for so long that, I mean, I know the kids at my school are, I mean, because I'm going to tell them about it, are just going to be blown away by everything that's been going on.
Here comes the IRS. You know, it's scary because it is the truth. So, I think this will cause people to become aware that their government is not this perfect place. The U.S. is not the perfect democracy, and you know, there's a conspiracy, and it's you know, the truth has to be given out.
The question that needs to be answered is if our government has this much corruption in it, I mean, are we going to have to do a major overhaul of our government, and what do we all have to give to do that, to make it how it's supposed to be, how we've always wanted it to be?
Get it right away. We're going to wait till the next one.
Seriously? In music? Doing what?
Where's the record company? I was pregnant last week. It's right over here. Oh, no, I didn't do that. No, she's got a perm.
You know, and his mom was like, completely was like, so we lied actually. Okay, we should be different. Upper, maybe. Will Jones had a story on CBS, ABC.